Tuesday live stream. Today's topic is how platform as a service is changing ERP implementations. And I'm going to introduce our guest here in just a moment. But before I do that, a couple quick logistical things. First of all, my name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. We have offices in North America, as well as Europe and Asia Pacific. So I'm glad to have you all here today. This interview is part of our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast, which you can find new episodes every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. So by being here today in this live discussion, you're part of the live interview process, and we'll edit this and add some stuff to it and make it part of our formal Transformation Ground Control podcast episode that is released here in a few weeks. And last but not least, maybe even most importantly, I wanted to ask that all of you please ask questions. I've got a few questions to get us started here today, but always love to hear the audience questions as well, and perspectives and questions, comments you might have. So please drop those in the chat if you don't mind. As we're going here, we're keeping an eye on all the platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And speaking of the chats, if you don't mind just dropping in the chat what city and country you're joining from today. I know we typically get a global audience, so it's always nice to see where everyone's joining from here today. So again, today's topic, how platform as a service is changing ERP implementations. Joining me today is Mark Simon from Celigo. Mark, thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Eric. It's a really pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here and talk to you again.
Absolutely. You had me on your podcast, and so it was only fair that I put you in the hot seat and ask you a bunch of questions as well. It's sort of return the favor, if you will. So thank you for being here today. But before we get started, just tell us a little bit about you, if you don't mind, about you and Celigo, what you do at Celigo, all that good stuff.
Sure, you bet. My name is Mark Simon. I'm the Vice President of Strategy at Celigo. And first, a little bit about Celigo. We're an integration platform as a service. So what was, traditionally, some people might have called middleware. So we really specialize in integrating applications. So moving data between applications, but it can be API to API integration, but it also can be flat file, B2B, API management, really moving that data and that as a foundation. And we really think of ourselves as an automation platform. So because integration really is the foundation of automation. Personally, now my background I originally started out my career as as a software engineer, writing a lot of code back in I think of it now as the Wild West days of the internet back in the late 90s, built, focused really on a lot of e-commerce initially, and really saw then the value and the power of integration. I was on the founding team and CTO of an e-commerce company where we actually took an automation first approach. So it just seemed like the thing to do at the time. We didn't leverage a bunch of fancy tools, but we did in a really scrappy way build a lot of tools to automate an organization from the ground up as it scaled from zero really, and saw the power of that. So then when I left the e-commerce company, I got into consulting and spent a little bit over a decade, and most of that in consulting, for a boutique consulting firm based in Seattle, Washington. And we focused on mid-market digital transformation with ERP implementation at its core, as well as custom software development. So I led the professional services practice most of the time there, and I got a chance to see up front about 500 clients over the years that we performed the core ERP implementation. But it really wasn't just the ERP. It's, ERP is that center of that digital transformation, that starting point for so many companies. So the ERP implementation, the extended integration around that to make the systems link together, and then custom development to either customize the ERP or to build custom business application features outside of that to really provide the business solution clients were looking for. And then from that experience, after we were acquired, I wanted to get into the software action, so to speak. So I joined Celigo when we're about 11 million ARR almost 6 years ago, and I've been with the company again as we've grown tremendously, and now we're over 700 people at this point, and we've got 5,000 customers. So I get a chance to kind of I've seen all these things what you talk a lot about from digital transformation. I've really been at the center of digital transformation from about 3 different perspectives at this point.
Interesting. Yeah, so that's really interesting that you started off with more of that technical background and then sort of shifted into, full on strategy. Now, what does that role entail? Like when you head up strategy at Celigo, like what's some of the stuff you do in that role, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, great question. Well, in some ways, well, there's been a focus, for the last 2.5, 3 years, mostly on our go-to-market motion and focusing on our movements, both upstream, because Celigo as an iPass has been focused on, really came out of, and it's fair to say, the lower half of the mid-market, and we're also coming out of, we started in the NetSuite ecosystem from an ERP perspective. So many people know us as a NetSuite focused iPass. That's really not, we're very good at it, and we are the most successful iPass in the NetSuite ecosystem. We're also very capable across other ERP ecosystems and in more diverse lines of business beyond just order to cash and quote to cash, where a lot of companies have traditionally started with us. So I spent a lot of my time focusing on that transition upstream and broadening, and I really get to work across all the departments in the organization as an overlay to that end. So I get to see a lot of things, and in essence get to kind of just roll up my sleeves and get in and solve problems wherever they are in the organization and in the customer journey, leveraging my background. And that for me is a lot of fun, because I still think of myself, essentially as a problem solver that merges technology and business.
Yeah, very cool. That's awesome. And you and I met. Well, first of all, I came across Celigo at a NetSuite conference. I didn't know who you guys were, and then I got to know you guys through at a NetSuite conference, and then you had me on your podcast, which was a really good discussion. And I have to say, just as a side note, you're one of the best podcast hosts. I know you're not a professional podcaster, but your questions were so good. I thought you were very good at asking questions and being thoughtful about the stuff you asked. But tell us a little bit about this podcast that you host. What's it called? What's it about? All that good stuff.
Well, first, thank you, Eric. I appreciate the compliment. Well, it's easy having you on our podcast, simply because there's so much overlap between our backgrounds and where I've been focused, where you're focused. There's just, we could talk for days about what we've seen in the intersection between our different perspectives on what we see in industry. But we host a podcast here. It's called the Technology Leaders Podcast, and we really just try to focus on that intersection of business and technology, and it's specifically focused on integration and automation. A lot around the mid-market and up into enterprise, but really trying to give, out in industry, there's a lot of business leaders that are technology leaders, and technology leaders that are transitioning into being business leaders. And we see a lot of that in companies that we work, that are really at the forefront, that are embarking on digital transformation. So really try to bring those perspectives on automation, integration, and some insight on trends and what's happening out there to help them really succeed in their roles.
Gotcha. Yeah. So with all the guests you've interviewed recently, are there a couple nuggets, or maybe 1 or 2 nuggets of findings or learnings or things you've learned from interviewing some of the guests you've talked to recently?
Oh, definitely. That's one of the things I really love about hosting the podcast is just the interesting people that I get to talk to that I wouldn't have bumped into, and my co-host Jordan Tenenbaum, he does a great job of finding some interesting things and kind of sometimes pushing the limits. Like, okay, how is that related? Okay, we get in and we find and ultimately find really, really interesting synergies and connections. But the one theme that we've had, and I think we started this a little bit over a year ago, and probably the most reoccurring theme that gets brought up is the topic of AI, because it's been so in the pot, it's leveled up as far as popularity in just the thinking of everyone, whether you're a technologist or not. And because the public has become so aware, it's just a normal, it comes up very often, but the theme behind that is more, okay, well, how to apply it, and how and why are businesses struggling to apply AI? What do they need to do? Why isn't it being adopted more broadly? Why isn't it maybe having the impact at a business level, especially uh, outside of enterprise, that we expected and hope it would have. And I think that's probably one of the biggest themes beyond just the core, how to integrate and automate your business more successfully.
Right, right. Yeah, it's hard to have any of these conversations without somehow touching on AI. Um, so just getting into the topic at hand and really setting the context for follow-up questions that myself and the audience might have. And by the way, audience questions, we're welcoming any questions you might have. So please chime in at any point. And if you don't mind, in the meantime, just drop in the chat what city and country you're joining from, just so we have a sense of where you all are here today. But as we get into the topic at hand here, we're going to talk about platform as a service and how it relates to ERP implementations. But before we dive into that, just maybe help us understand and get some high-level understanding of what is integration platform. Or first of all, let's start with platform as a service. I've heard both terms: platform as a service, integration platform as a service, or PaaS and iPass. Can you just help us unpack that a bit? Help us understand what that all means.
Yeah, so there's certainly a lot of solutions out there that are orienting themselves as platform as a service. So typically, in this move to software as a service, it is a large number of those software applications really think of themselves as more broader based platforms that they're orienting their customers around, giving them a tool set as a platform in order to enable accomplishment of a function or often several functions. So that platform as a service, almost always a multi-tenant, or very often a multi-tenant cloud-hosted application. And then more specifically, beyond that, a subset of that is that integration platform as a service. So a multi-tenant cloud-hosted platform to integrate your applications, move the data between one or more applications in your organization, or sometimes often between your organizations and partners or customers, between third parties. And so at Celigo, we're at iPass, and we really think of ourselves kind of as the first of the next generation, the iPass 2.0, if you will.
Gotcha. Yeah, makes total sense. So when we back up here, and you mentioned that you started, in the space in the late 90s, it's the same time I started out. I know back at that time, this whole concept of best of breed and platforms and integration, it was almost a bad word and something that is sort of a necessary evil. Like, oh man, we've got to get some middleware. And it's just sort of like, if we can avoid it, let's avoid it. And let's just find, a single ERP system or whatever. How has that changed, in recent years? Or has it changed? I guess to start, do you think it has changed?
How has this? Well, it's definitely, integration is evolved a great deal, and I think of it a little bit in parallels to how ERP has evolved over the same period of time. But I think integration's been a step or two behind the ERP evolution over the same period. So, and when I started out that same, when you did, Eric, integration was, very often, the majority of the time it was still being done, by hand, hand coding. A very technical team of developers was hand coding with their language of choice, integrate code to move and transform that data between applications. And now at the time, middleware, as it was commonly called, that was really a realm for the most part of enterprises, in only some enterprises. And so there really wasn't a lot of options. Microsoft was starting to dabble in some. There were some tools. You had concepts like Informatica and BizTalk were there, but it was especially for smaller companies or faster moving companies, it was really, everything was hand coded throughout, almost all industries to a large extent. And then that started to evolve as really think of it as the first generation of iPass players came on the scene. And that's like, think of MuleSoft, and then into Boomi. Those are both two examples of that first gen of iPass. And they were really very oriented. So that was typically, those solutions were also very often deployed on-prem. They weren't necessarily, especially those first generations, not cloud deployments, and those are very developer-centric tools. So they're oriented towards providing a better toolkit for building integrations, but they're oriented for developers both to design and build their integrations, but also to manage them. And so as iPass progressed with Celigo, the intent here was to move integration, the build and the management, make it more less developer centric and more oriented towards a business user. We really target, for example, trying to target the tech savvy business user, being able to engage, whether it's building an integration or not, but certainly managing it. And that has a lot to do with why and how, what an integration is doing in an organization, and how it's, really acts as a contract between systems when you integrate something, regardless of what you do. And because of that, any change management issues, any endpoint issues, they'll often show up in your integration first. And so an error in integration, for example, is not a technical problem, but it's actually a business process problem. So to manage integration at scale, it's vastly more efficient to be able to pull those business users in, because it lies with those business processes and those systems coming back to being able to resolve those efficiently. And it's a lot more efficient if you can get the business users involved than having this, you think of it as an internal integration development team. Well, that is still very common, and we most commonly see, but being able to pair that with the business users more easily provides for a tremendous amount of more flexibility in being able to manage and resolve the integration, just make it more of an efficient process to own that for the organization.
Yeah, makes total sense. It's super interesting how that's evolved, over the last couple decades. Just turning to the audience here real quickly, I want to say hi to Darian in Denver on LinkedIn, and also a comment here from Meherban on LinkedIn. Says, hi, Eric. This is Meherban from Toronto. Loved your book, The Final Countdown. An excellent overview of BPM and why it's important before selecting software or an SI. So thank you for that. In fact, I just happen to have a copy of that book right here. If anyone wants to buy it, just go to thefinalcountdown.com. And you can also find it on Amazon. Sorry for that shameless plug there in the middle of our conversation, Mark, but had to do it.
But that's good. I just ordered mine 2 days ago, so I was like, I have 200 minutes. So it's coming. So
you have to let me know what you think of it once you get it. And I'll sign it for you next time I see you. But here's a question from Darian on LinkedIn. This is a really good one. I think it's sort of a good segue from what we were just talking about a second ago, Mark. But the question is, are there trade-offs you have to make when going with platform as a service versus monolithic ERP systems? And I think that's a really important point, because I feel like everything you're talking about so far and everything you guys do as a company with Celigo is sort of moving us away potentially, or providing an alternative to monolithic ERP systems, which, the way I would define monolithic ERP systems, for those listening that may not have heard that term or just don't know what it means, that's more sort of your standard single one size fits all integration of a full, one single ERP system. Whereas what you're talking about is, with Celigo and iPass in general, is more of a model to integrate multiple solutions. But so how do you make those, or how would you summarize those trade-offs between platform as a service, monolithic ERP?
Yeah, and this is something that I've definitely seen in that has been represented in that evolution of ERP over the last 15 years. And I think there was this concept originally that your ERP could and should handle all of your business processes. That the ERP is a single ERP will handle, that monolithic ERP is the best solution to all of your business processes. And I think what we've seen is with the proliferation of SaaS applications out there in business. So there's now literally tens of thousands of SaaS applications, all providing, some absolutely amazing specialized solutions for your business process. You can go down to something very, very refined, or something as broad as just pick something like Salesforce for your CRM. And so in a lot of cases, you've had these applications become foundational, and they've become the best of breed for a given line of business, for example, whether it's CRM, or maybe for a particular vertical or a subset of accomplishing these tasks. And so departments and organizations, they want to use these tools because they feel like they solve, and they very often do solve, their business problems most efficiently. And so that what that's created is this natural pull away from that monolithic ERP, with the concept more of an ERP company adopting an ERP and then adding in these SaaS apps as they go along the way. And you have everything from those really big foundational SaaS applications. Might be like I mentioned, CRM is a great example, and maybe a marketing automation platform, and then maybe your HRIS system, a Workday, something like that. And now you've got 3 or 4 or 5 foundational SaaS applications all around your ERP. But then you get that secondary tier, and I think of in certain SaaS apps have then created their own, I call it the constellation around them, where particularly CRM is a great example. It's anymore, I don't think you necessarily purchase choose Salesforce as your CRM just for Salesforce. You choose it because of the constellation of applications that are there around it that enable you to automate your sales process and make your sales team and your marketing teams more effective. And so with that movement, with adding all of these SaaS apps, and the departments and organizations and down to an individual level are pulling in. This is the rise of everything from, on one spectrum, shadow IT to which the IT leaders everywhere despise, but all the way through very explicit approved purchases of sometimes dozens of SaaS applications just in a single department, residing alongside of the ERP system and the foundational SaaS apps. And what this creates is it creates a very, very powerful business systems environment, but you have to integrate between those systems, or otherwise you're just creating new data silos, and you're solving one problem, and you're solving one big problem often in these cases, in creating others. And this is one of the biggest things I've seen, we see as a company talking to business leaders, is it almost always starts with the ERP implementation, because this is so hard on an organization. I always used to sort of talk to my clients about this as being an ERP implementation is probably the toughest thing their business will go through. Very often. And but then they implement it, they get it up and running, and 6 months, 3 months later, 6 months later is a better check-in, and more of the smoke and the dust is settled by then. But it's like, well, things are better, but they're not quite what they envisioned. And that almost always comes down to a lack of integration. There's not as much integration as there should have been planned in to connect the other system together and really create a single business system, both for employees and, even more importantly, for customer experience, out of all of these SaaS applications. And this is really given because of that shape of how that movement away from that monolithic ERP to this universe of SaaS apps, and we see customers all the time of ours with 100+ SaaS apps quite regularly. And you see really the need to integrate those together. That's how you make that work, and you get those best of breed solutions with integration between them, and thoughtful integration, planned integration, and that's how you end up with achieving really the objectives and the business efficiency of that true automation and digital transformation that was the intent all along.
Yeah. So you mentioned Salesforce and NetSuite, and those are two good examples, because both of those, especially especially Salesforce, as you mentioned, is more of a constellation, as you put it, which is a great word. You're getting the CRM system, but you're also getting all the third-party apps that have been developed on the Force platform. And NetSuite's starting to do that too, where they've got third-party developers that are creating apps in the NetSuite, built on the NetSuite backbone. So even in those cases, even when you've got, call it a single vendor, but you've got multiple apps that were built within that platform, even then you still need to think about integration and how you're going to tie those systems together. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because not all those apps in that constellation are natively built into the platform. Sometimes they are, and when that works and that meets the needs, that's fantastic, and that's one option. But a lot of the best applications for solving those problems sit outside, and they sit outside. And to be successful in those ecosystems, they very often have to provide what we call native integration to the core ERP they're working with, whether they sit in, say, the NetSuite ecosystem or the Microsoft Business Central or SAP. What those applications need to integrate in, but that those native integrations often work at the beginning for more simple needs, but growing companies often move, they grow past what those native integrations can do at some point, and they're limited by them, and they need to then move on to building their own integrations, or shutting down, if they can, parts of the native integration, and then moving to integration that meets their needs more specifically. And I see this very, very, very commonly. Worked great to get started going, the company grows, and they're like, oh, well, we can't do this, or we can't implement the process like that. And you're like, well, why? And it's, well, the integration to X doesn't support that. And you're like, well, that can be solved, right? Use a modern tool, solve that. Don't let your tools dictate your business processes when there's a competitive advantage to having a different business process.
Yeah. It's easy for a lot of software vendors to say, don't worry about that different business process or competitive advantage you have, because you could just use our software, just do it the way it was built. And the last thing you want to do is water down whatever advantage you have in the market. That makes total sense. So I think it's safe to say that nowadays, best of breed and multiple applications it's not a bad word anymore like it used to be. And in many cases, it's a necessity. I mean, even if a company wants to go full on single integrated ERP, which I'll admit a lot of our clients say, hey, let's find a single platform. Let's put just one system, which in a perfect world, that's great. I mean, if you can find that, I'd say have at it and do that. The problem is this is not a perfect world. And usually you might get 70 or 80% of the way there and find that, wow, there's that last 20% or whatever it is that doesn't fit. Our ERP system doesn't quite fit. Doesn't mean you abandon the ERP system, but now you've got to figure out, what am I going to do about that other 20%? Do I go out and find a best of breed solution? Do I find an app that's built within the constellation, as you put it, especially if I'm using Salesforce, NetSuite, Oracle Fusion starting to do the same thing. I think Workday is starting to do it too. A lot of these
Exactly.
a lot of these software vendors are providing that sort of ecosystem or constellation that people can build third-party apps. So you can go out there and find whatever it is you want, and then obviously use tools like iPass to integrate it. But how have you seen, clients manage some of the challenges that go along with that? So now, instead of one single ERP system, we might have, say, 5 systems. We've got a core ERP, and then we've got 4 other main operational systems we've got to sort of bolt onto that. What's some advice you have for customers, or how have you seen customers navigate the technical complexity and the fact that now you're managing multiple systems? You've got to manage data integration, the architecture, all that stuff. What's some advice there?
Yeah, I think the biggest advice there is to adopt what we call an automation first mentality. So very often integration and automation are thought of, they come in, they're brought in as a band-aid. Hey, we're going to buy these apps, and they think about sort of like very, very obvious, absolutely critical integration, which is where you have to start. But they don't really think about the integration and automation from a full business process perspective. So they get those things up and running, launched, and then they start to be, then they can focus on the second order pain points or issues that are coming up, data integrity problems, inefficiencies, manually, their team being forced to manually move data between these systems. And then they start automating in a very reactionary fashion. And then if you couple that with using, say, legacy tools that or no tools, back to that hand coding of integration, which we still see an absolute ton of out there in industry. Well, that's now, you can't, an organization, nobody has unlimited resources. And so they can't possibly keep up with the pace of change with the new SaaS apps, the changing, the business process evolving. And so that's very often done in a centralized IT model, and centralized IT there then ends up being very much behind the curve. So very reactionary, never automated enough, always kind of doing, coming in, having to come in later to sort of constantly put out like integration fires and automation fires. And what we see is that shift to that automation first mentality will smooth that out dramatically. Every time you're changing or adding a new app, and like, okay, how can we automate all of this? How can we automate this being plugged in? And just thinking that through a little bit more and posing that question. And we see that mindset really shift to proactive automation around that, starting with integration at its core. And that leads to companies really digitally transforming faster and dramatically faster than their peers who are more reactionary.
Gotcha. Yeah. Now, what about those that think that, well, if I'm a CIO and I'm leading a digital transformation, let's say, I might think, well, everything you just described, Mark, that sounds to me like a symptom of people not wanting to change. So what I mean by that is, instead of putting in a new system, one single system that standardizes everything on a common platform, now you've got maybe a more of decentralized approach where you've got, sales is out finding their own CRM system, HR is out there, using their own HR technologies. And so you're sort of allowing the masses to find the technologies that work best for them, but not necessarily looking at the one single integrated platform. So what would you say to people that say, hey, that sounds like just an excuse to resist change or to, not take more of a holistic approach to their digital transformation?
Well, I think that's a great question. And what's necessary is to have IT and those business units working together. I think that's the biggest issue that I've seen in organizations where they're feeling like the departments feel like they're working against IT. IT's working against them all the time or holding them back. And but they have to work together because there has to be this central vision on accomplishing the digital transformation and working efficiently and moving in a coherent direction with oversight. But also the departments need to have input on what works best for them and how their business processes need to evolve and they're going to be the experts on their areas of the business and what's happening. And it's when IT and those business teams really team up together and mesh together in more, we often think of it from an integration standpoint as concept of federated integration. From an integration standpoint where IT is overseeing and managing the integration, but the line of business, the departments are often engaged. Their teams are often get an opportunity with oversight to build their own integrations, to manage them, to be more involved. And that federated concept, those working together, so that you have mission critical decisions and the broader range visionary planning happening from IT leadership, but meshing with the departments. That's really, that federated concept is where we see it working, by far the most efficiently. And those companies simply, they grow faster and they digitally transform at a higher pace.
Right. Yeah. And I think, what you're describing here is a way to find what I think is a nice balance between, like you said, having IT working with the business, and you can still have this sort of more of a decentralized best of breed approach, whatever you want to call it, but you can also do it in a more strategic, holistic, even though I hate that word holistic. I think most people do. But you can look at it from a big picture perspective of like the entire enterprise. What are our different applications we're going to use in different parts of the enterprise? We might let, certain divisions or departments use their own technologies that fits best for them, but we're going to have a sort of a strategic overarching view of how we tie it all together and how data flows and what the architecture is going to look like and all that stuff. And that's where iPass comes in. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect assessment. Exactly. You have to have that oversight and that greater vision on how this is strategically going to tie together. And one of the things I think it's very important in that process from a technology leadership standpoint is always challenging business units. Teams, because you can go too far in one direction in this new direction, and teams can adopt too many SaaS applications. They can adopt too many point applications without a plan to have them integrate. And organizations can end up with a lot of overlap within a single department and across the organization. So you always have to be asking, okay, does this make sense to adopt this? Oh, you have a need, but does this make sense? And then conversely, are those things, using those applications, is that in line with the ideal business process? And this is always, I always saw this as the crux of any business systems implementation is, are you customizing the system to your business, or are you going to adopt best practices that are come closer to out of the box, out of the systems that you're acquiring? And that, I think, is always has to be, you always have to have this very sort of challenger mentality around this, and I think that's what IT can help bring. Hey, are we thinking about this the right way? Should we adopt a new application? Is this better? Are we better off maybe using the core ERP and adopting a more best of breed, or is there a clear strategic advantage for us as a business to do something different? Okay, then if the clear answer is yes, then you should invest there. And I think that there needs to be a push and pull there, and a little tension in the business all the time to create the right outcome.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Here's another question from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian asks, are there some pros and cons organizations need to consider with public PaaS versus private versus hybrid? And maybe I'll just sort of back up for a second. In the world of software as a service, you have, or I should say in the world of cloud, you have private cloud, you have public cloud, and then obviously you've got on-premise, which is not cloud, but there's sort of the three options there. And then there's the hybrid option as well. Does that also apply to platform as a service, or is it all sort of that SaaS model, if you will?
That definitely applies to platforms as a service as well. Definitely. There's those trade-offs with those where more of a public PaaS model where you've got multi-tenant applications natively built for the cloud. Those applications typically can be more cost disruptive. They can provide more value because they're able to deploy more efficiently into their infrastructure. And then conversely, it's another added layer of complexity to be able to, and the costs go up to deploy those in a private cloud, or still be able to do that in some type of on-prem capacity, or a hybrid model. And those are all always increases the complexity of managing it, deploying it, owning it, and those costs come through whether it's still wrapped in a software as a service bubble and handled by your provider, or now you're having to take those costs on internally. Those costs are have to be born somewhere, and so to bear those costs, you have to be just realize that the further you get away from that public platform as a service model, it's just going to get more expensive, but you get more control. You get more control over security, more control over environment, and in certain situations, those absolute requirements. We look at government, for example, federal government, the deployments of applications, some healthcare situations. We often see this come up. In those cases, it can be absolutely critical and a requirement. There's not an option, but very often there is an option. It's really always assessing or asking, do we really need to do it that way, or is that what are the pros and cons, and assess that, because we see costs going up dramatically for organizations kind of hold on to this. Okay, we're going to do cloud, but we have to do private cloud, and sometimes it's really not justified at this point.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So from a security perspective, I mean, how does when we look at iPass and this whole sort of best of breed model and platform as a service in general, how does that affect security? Because I know a lot of times when there's a security breach or systems get hacked, it's oftentimes not the core ERP or the core operational system. Oftentimes it's one of the third-party apps that's been integrated, and there's some sort of backdoor that
Yeah.
hackers get into, and then that gets them access to the full, integrated suite of applications or the data within it. How does iPass and best of breed, does that create more vulnerabilities? If so, how do we overcome that? What do we do from a cybersecurity perspective?
Yeah, and I think that approach definitely increases, the best of breed approach certainly increases the security risk. You have more points of entry, and now we're moving more data uh, between these solutions. Very often, SaaS solutions in the public cloud, and so it does create more risk and opportunity for attack. And that's why we've certainly in the integration space, we've seen the awareness of security and the investment in security and management of security around SaaS applications increased dramatically over the last several years. Because that really has to be at the forefront. There's a lot of business value, tremendous business value to be gained from adopting these applications, but only if you conduct your due diligence around security. And I've had an opportunity to work very, very closely with our security team as we've grown as an organization here. And it's very interesting to work with them to assess SaaS vendors and see what's out there. You have to be assessing security of SaaS applications when you purchase them, and be looking at them, go in with you fully aware of the risks you're taking on. Are they a permanent data store? What data is going there? What's your risk profile around that data? What are they doing? Are they SOC 2 compliant? Have they been SOC 2 certified and are audited? Any of the other numerous certification regimes that you may need to fall under as an organization. You have to be assessing your SaaS apps, and this is one of the greatest risks I see with rapidly growing organizations that are adding in very quickly they're and adopting new SaaS applications that they often get in front of, they get out ahead of their security. And so it's critical that you have the right balance between moving quickly and adopting that new technology, but also making sure that each one of those touch points is secure, and that you're leveraging a platform, a solid, secure platform for that integration. And that is one of the areas that we see as an attack vector often is some of these homegrown integration approaches to solving problems. It's not anywhere near as secure as an integration platform as a service for moving that data.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So something, it's like you mentioned earlier, you made a comment that really resonated. It's sort of like you just have to assess pros and cons. I'm paraphrasing something you said, but it's sort of like this is all about trade-offs. It's all about risk, and no matter what you do, even if you go with a single ERP system, that creates another set of risks that maybe you've shored up the entry points from a cybersecurity perspective, let's just say. So great, you've mitigated that risk now because you've got one system. Doesn't completely mitigate it, but at least you've reduced the risk. But now you've created other issues because now you've got a single system, and that puts more pressure on the organization to change. And so now maybe you've shifted the risk from more of a cybersecurity or a technical complexity perspective. Now you're just shifting it to more of a change in an operational risk, because now you're forcing more change on the organization potentially. So I think that's a good point. You've just all of this stuff we're talking about involves risk. We just have to assess the risk and figure out which risk profile and scenario best fits what we're looking for.
Exactly. And you have to assess that individually around a given solution and an area of business process in the organization. Some cases it's worth taking on what potentially looks like more risk and investing in mitigating that risk and managing it. And in other cases, it doesn't, and you slide your tolerance for risk in the other direction. I think that's really the key thing for modern IT organizations and security leaders to look at that and be like, okay, well, what are the business needs? Where can we gain business advantage by taking on more security risk and mitigating it in other ways versus, okay, this isn't going to gain us much here. And that's a continual balance.
Right. Right. Now, I have two questions at the same time I wanted to ask you. I should probably just pick one, right? Here's one from Third Stage, or from LinkedIn that I'll start with. Is PaaS able to change or scale up and down as an organization changes? So as an organization grows, they evolve, you acquire new companies, you enter new markets, whatever, you change. Is iPass able to? How does that work as far as scaling up and down?
Yeah, so by leveraging an iPass solution, you're able to scale up and down much more efficiently from an integration standpoint. So you're able to, say you've gone to market, and we see this very often. We have a ton of our customers that are often product-based companies, and they're the very first point where after they implement their ERP, the immediate step at the same time to go live is to integrate their primary sales channels. So that might be e-commerce sites, that might be Amazon, that might be sales channels, multiple of those, and often doing this as sometimes as testing the market, so to speak. So whether it's a large organization and this is the first time they're selling direct to consumer, or maybe they're still doing B2B sales, but they're conducting it in a more web-oriented manner. There's a lot of approaches. In what can often happen, and this is fantastic when it does, is that those sales channels can take off, something can hit, and those can be sometimes very, very successful and unexpectedly. And the organizations that are leveraging iPass for the integration for those now have a much more scalable architecture to scale up when maybe order volume increases by 10x or 100x or 1000x. And we see that with our customers and our platform. And that's one of the benefits of leveraging our approach as a multi-tenant SaaS application, as that no individual customer impacts the load at all. Once you reach a certain scale of ours, where we have thousands of customers, so you could scale up to as long as your applications support it. And this is where organizations often have the most problem, is something might scale up at one point. So maybe your orders increase by 100x in a day. Well, the iPass can handle it, scale up often without even touching anything, without even tuning anything, and handle that. But you've also got to make sure that you're thinking about the destination of this data. Can you get that data into your ERP? Does your architecture and configuration and implementation within the ERP say allow that data to get in? Does the way that you've mapped your data flow with your 3PLs and back, and especially in multi-channel commerce, how does your strategy allow for this to keep inventory up to date? Your multi-channel inventory allocation, is this going to work if you presented with an opportunity to scale? So just because so iPass scales, yes, but you've got to think about this. Okay, I've got apps that can scale, more apps that can scale as part of my system deployment, but make sure that everything else can, and you've thought that through, because you're only going to be able to scale as much as your weakest link there.
Right. Yeah. Makes total sense. And speaking of data, it's hard. I tried to get through the conversation without bringing up AI again, but I couldn't help myself. So AI,
we almost did it.
We almost did it. You mentioned it earlier, and it sort of stuck in my head, and I had to come back to it. But so AI, let's talk about that for a second. How is AI and sort of all these different software applications are obviously investing very heavily in artificial intelligence and building AI capabilities in their technologies, which is in many ways showcasing or underscoring the importance of data, and how, because a good AI model only works as good as the data going into it. So how is data, or is artificial intelligence impacting what you guys do and what this world of iPass and best of breed in general?
Well, it is, in that it is bringing a new focus, and it's raising the awareness around and the prioritization of integration and automation within organizations. So AI is just another tool in the automation toolbox. Now, it's an exciting, very flashy one. And it does, there's a lot of very interesting things in it, in sort of, out of the box, with proper oversight. The generative AI tools and large language models can be used to assist any number of employees doing their normal everyday jobs. But to really get that deeper value from AI solutions, it requires having a solid base of data. So you're going to get the most value not by allowing your employees to use ChatGPT, or even going as far as building custom GPTs for your organization, but taking it multiple steps further and in connecting to get and leveraging the power of the AI tools, leveraging OpenAI through API calls, consolidating data across multiple data sources, and then leveraging AI tools to provide you insights, to answer questions more quickly of your employee base, of facilitating getting your customers answers, identifying patterns within your customer data to say head off churn or to optimize customer lifetime value. But all those things are dependent upon data, and that's the foundation. It just comes back to this core, which if you don't have good business processes, you're not going to have accurate enough data to really be able to leverage AI. And what we see, and what I've seen in a lot of cases now, is AI solutions kind of being hurriedly slapped on the top of a really poor foundation. And you're basically, and all automation can just can give you garbage output, but AI based automation can give you exponentially worse garbage on the other end. So you've got to make sure, okay, you've got a good solid business process foundation. Your data's doesn't have to be perfect, but it's clean enough to get to be able to leverage. And then once those pieces are in place, then you can start to leverage those the AI tools and techniques. And from there, there's some very amazing stuff that can be done. And you don't have to you can often, I see organizations trying to start too big, but it's often best to start really small in a corner of the organization where hey, I've got pretty good data, because all this data is generated just in this one SaaS app over here. Okay, I'm going to plug in an AI solution just on that and just start there. And it's something where and then organizations start to see the power of it. Start small, build out, and then accelerate the capabilities of the organization, but especially the employees. We see some fantastic tools. We built some incredible ones internally, and we've seen customers do the same. And it's amazing what you can do from an efficiency standpoint. But start small, take steps forward. Start with where you have a good business process and good data, and it'll get you there. Versus, again, this is where I think everyone's struggling. Is that foundation for the AI.
Yeah. And that what you're describing too also seems to support more of that agile approach that a lot of organizations are taking, rather than that traditional waterfall. Let's design one big massive system. Like you said, you can start small, and you can use iPass as a way to start small, but still tie those small wins back to the bigger picture and the data flow, and certainly the AI models that you might be trying to use in your organization.
Exactly.
How do you recommend that organizations and project teams determine if this iPass model is right for them, or at least determine if it's a good option for them? What are some of the criteria you would say, if you're an organization that fits these criteria, then you would definitely want to consider iPass?
At this point, any organization that's growing, that's modernizing, that's going through digital transformation and trying to automate, needs an integration platform. That you need to integrate to be a modern organization. Maybe if you're a small static org and you're living on legacy applications that have already been integrated, and you're not changing as a business, and you're not growing much, well, you could probably stay there and not touch anything. You don't need an iPass, but that's a business that's dying as well. And so any business that is embarking on digital transformation absolutely needs an iPass. It is, to have teams internally hand coding integrations or using some of the legacy tools. It's like living in the Stone Age. There are cases where, though, that's still isolated scenarios where that's still the best approach, but by far, for 98% of the companies out there, by far the best approach is to leverage an iPass, and particularly at the inflection point in which you're automating. It seems like, okay, when you realize, hey, we're automating the business, we're implementing a new ERP, whenever you're touching those foundational systems, that is a great point to be thinking about it. But also, you can come in from another direction, and really anytime you're struggling with data quality or manual, like, oh, this person is moving this data from this system to this system, or we have these problems because this data doesn't line up. Those are all problems that are solved through better integration, and better integration through an iPass. And so organizations can start at a very small point as well, or with the big initiatives when they're redoing those foundational SaaS apps. You can take either approach, so big or small, but iPass is absolutely the way to go, especially a modern iPass that's going to allow that's going to give power to development from a development and code-based approach, and give your technical team capabilities, but also leverage those tech-savvy business users. Modern iPass will give you much more power and capability to accelerate that automation in the organization than a more legacy one. And I think that's one of the key things to consider as an organization.
Yeah, that's great advice. Now, how do you recommend that organizations and project teams that do determine that they want to consider potential iPass solutions, or at least consider it as an option for their transformation, how do you recommend they choose the right tool?
That's and this is really important. Is to look again. Make sure you're looking at modern iPass tools. You want to, and you also want to pick. There's a lot of players in the space. There's a lot of new players. A lot of things that solve maybe small sectors of the integration problem, but they don't handle the big ones. So I think one of the number one thing is, when I mentioned earlier, is picking an iPass that's part of iPass 2.0 that's going to give tech savvy business users access, and so it's not just a developer tool, but you want to make sure you also have development capabilities, and the platform can scale. So make sure that you're selecting a true iPass, not just say a task automation tool, but a true iPass that's oriented to move large amounts of data through the platform, that can service both the needs of developers and business users, and then look to make sure that you're working with an iPass that has a vision for the future, that has broader capabilities, because companies often start just at thinking, okay, we just need to integrate here at a small section of the business. But as businesses grow and scale, the need for automation and integration grows exponentially. So just always be thinking about, okay, can this platform handle connecting dozens or hundreds of applications, and take that into account, and make sure that you're looking at that and selecting an iPass that'll meet those needs as you grow as well.
Yeah, it's great advice. And how can people learn more about you, or connect with you, learn more about Celigo, all that stuff? What's the takeaway here?
Well, a great place to learn about modern iPass solutions, what they can do for your business, is go to celigo.com. That's CELIGO.com. and check us out on our website or through LinkedIn. I'm personally on LinkedIn as well, and you can follow me. Also, I'm sharing a lot about iPass and automation and how to accelerate business. And happy to talk to anyone out there about what we can do to automate your business and help it achieve really the digital transformation objectives.
Right. And then you're on LinkedIn. So what's the best way? Just Mark Simon is your name, and you can
Yep.
search Mark Simon Celigo, and you'll find you there on
Yep.
LinkedIn. So that's another good place to connect too. So, well, thanks for being here today, Mark. Really appreciate it. It was a great conversation. I learned a lot, and appreciate the audience questions as well. So
Great.
appreciate it,
Thanks for
Mark.
the opportunity, Eric. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you to the audience for being here today. Again, this live production will become part of a weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast. You can watch past episodes and keep up with current episodes, including this one when it does come out here in a few weeks. Go to transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can see all the past episodes there. And we put out new episodes every Wednesday, so be sure to check that out. Have a great week in the meantime. We will see you all soon.